The City of Barrie is redeveloping Bradford Street into a multi-modal corridor. Last week, during the last public information session, residents viewed the final design concept and provided feedback. The corridor will feature bike tracks and wider sidewalks for better safety. It can also be future-proofed for active travel with the possibility of outside lane being used for parking, electric vehicle charging, or an expanded flexible public space. Residents want the corridor to have urban look and feel, making it a destination for all Barrie residents. Residents can provide their feedback through the website by Jan 6, 2023. The link is barrie.ca/BradfordEA. The link is in the description below. Use the timestamps in the description to jump to different parts of the public information session.
We'd like to begin this evening's presentation acknowledging the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe people, which include Odawa, Ojibwe, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We also acknowledge the Wendat Nation, who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. We are dedicated to honoring Indigenous history and culture and recognize the enduring presence of Indigenous peoples on this land. And we're committed to moving forward in the spirit of reconciliation and respect First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people. As Phil said, this is the third and final PIC for the Bradford Street Corridor Class Environmental Assessment Study. This package picks up where PIC 2 left off, and we will review key aspects of the PIC 2 package presented back in June. But if you weren't able to attend that session, I'd encourage you to go online on the project webpage and access that package and have a look at it. It's pretty packed full of information and decisions that were made at that time. Tonight, we're also going to look at the road and right-of-way alignment options, and we're going to review the concept design plan for Bradford Street. We're going to discuss the approach to the final impact assessment and documentation, and then we're going to identify next steps, both within this study and into the future. And we're covering a lot today. There's a lot of aspects where you may want to take a closer look at things at your own pace. So we encourage you to take the time to review the information package and the design concept. They're two different files in the days following this meeting. And these materials and the recording of the presentation, of course, will be available on the project webpage in the next couple of days. So what is this study about? This project reimagines Bradford Street as a future multimodal corridor within the Urban Growth Center. The long-range planning study will confirm and protect the right-of-way required to provide more attractive and accessible, sustainable transportation options, which include improved sidewalks to enhance safety and accessibility of pedestrians and mobility device users, new in-boulevard cycle track for all ages and abilities with connectivity to the mobility hub and GO and the broader cycling network, traffic operational improvements to enhance safety and opportunities for transit priority measures, and a streetscape design to create a vibrant and attractive street environment that encourages this active use. Given the long-range nature of the study, there are no immediate capital works planned. This project is about protecting enough right-of-way space that the street can serve the needs of the future community to 2051. The study framework we use here is called the Municipal Class Environmental Assessment, or Class EA. It's a planning and approval process for municipal infrastructure that follows Ontario's Environmental Assessment Act. There are 4 study phases with public, agency, and Indigenous community engagement embedded through the process. We've moved through phase 1, reviewing the study background, the planning and policy context, identifying needs and opportunities. And in phase 2, we considered alternative solutions to address the needs and opportunities. And we presented all of this information and the decision-making in PICs 1 and 2 in January and June of 2022, respectively. We're now completing phase 3 in developing the design concept and then moving into phase 4, which is the preparation of the study documentation. In early 2023, we'll be reporting to Council. We'll be reviewing the study recommendations with Council for their consideration and acceptance. There's an opportunity at that time for members of the public to request delegation status at the Council meeting. The date of the meeting hasn't yet been set, but will be advertised in the newspaper, and it'll be posted on the project webpage. And for those who've requested to be on our project mailing list or who have registered for any of the PICs, will be notified via email. Pending Council acceptance, a notice of study completion will be issued and the environmental study report will be available for a 30-day public review period beyond that. The next few slides capture some of the key aspects that were presented at PIC2 in June and provide important planning context for the decisions that we've made since then. As I said earlier, Bradford Street is transforming and there are numerous approved and proposed developments with more applications to come, and the city expects that the majority of the corridor will be redeveloped. The city's official plan designates lands abutting Bradford Street as high density with minimum building height of 12 stories and ground floor retail and commercial uses. Bradford Street is that primary transportation link within the urban growth center and is being planned as a complete street that will be integrated with the future community and provides mobility for all users, transit riders, pedestrians, cyclists, mobility device users, and drivers. Overall, we will see Bradford Street shift to a more pedestrian-friendly environment, enabling people to live and work within a walkable community with easy access to public transit to encourage less vehicle use. That's the vision. At PIC2, we talked about the list of potential planning solutions that we consider to address the needs of future Bradford Street. We looked at do nothing, access management, operational improvements, multimodal improvements on Bradford Street within an expanded right-of-way, reduced travel lanes and improvements within the existing right-of-way. And lastly, we looked at the possibility of addressing community needs by improving other corridors. Our recommended solutions were to manage access, improve traffic operations, and expand the right-of-way to address multimodal needs and align with the vision for future Bradford Street as set out in the official plan and the transportation master plan. Why these solutions? Well, we're demanding a lot from Bradford Street in the future, and we need to have enough space to accommodate in boulevards, cycle track, and accessible sidewalks, street trees, planters, and other landscape opportunities, street furniture, benches, bike racks, pedestrian scale lighting, improved transit stops, future transit priority measures, operational improvements like turn lanes at intersections, and required setbacks for the hydro line and other utilities. And our recommendation at this time provides the greatest flexibility for the city to respond to emergent technology and changes in travel modes and provision of additional amenities over the next 30 years. So while maintaining 4 lanes now doesn't preclude future decisions to reallocate space within the right-of-way. And what does that mean? It means in 30 years from now, if we see the shift to active travel and transit that we're hoping for, the outside lanes could be converted to on-street parking or electric vehicle charging stations or an expanded flexible public space. We know that the city may consider a business case for higher order transit network that includes Bradford Street in its upcoming transportation master plan due to start in 2023. So again, we want to maintain that flexibility for future decision making in this corridor with our recommendation. Whether you agree or not with that recommendation, one thing we heard loud and clear from the community is that Bradford Street must be a distinctly urban look and feel. It needs to be a destination, and we're not planning an urban or a suburban roadway. So With that point, at PIC2, we introduced sketches of how future Bradford Street could look. And this is one of those sketches. And we introduced this conceptual road cross-section to take a closer look at each of the elements that make up the right-of-way requirements. So Kate, this is a bit of an animation. So let's add the sidewalk, setback, and buffer. Thank you. Now let's add the cycle track and then the boulevard and curb. Great. The boulevard space will be occupied by those street furnishings, landscaping, the hydro line, transit stops, and pedestrian scale lighting. And those all contribute to the vibrancy of the off roadway areas. Now let's add the travel lanes. We've accounted for a narrower inside lane and wider outside lane to better accommodate transit vehicles. And finally, the median area is an opportunity for street tree plantings mid-block with space for turn lanes at intersections. As you can see, we are illustrating the hydro poles, and we've met with Electra to talk to them about the project. And the city may, in time, explore the feasibility and cost implications of burying the hydro. This isn't a decision that we'll make in this EA, but it will be something that's considered in future and in the context of land redevelopment. Okay. In PIC2, we also reviewed the options for the Tiffin Street intersections at Bradford Street and Lakeshore Drive. Alternative 1 involves some reconfiguration and improvement while maintaining signalized intersections. And alternative 2 considered a pair of roundabouts with a mid-block pedestrian cyclist crossing to provide that connection to the mobility hub and go. Each alternative offered distinct benefits and challenges to different road users. And with all things considered, and in this particular context, we believe the signalized intersection design is slightly preferred because it's perceived by pedestrians, cyclists, mobility device users as being more familiar, easier to access and navigate. It provides more direct routing for those active users and mobility device users. It's generally better accessibility to hearing and visually impaired. And it's more compact and more desirable, perhaps from a human scale perspective, especially given the intensification and redevelopment that's going to occur around this area. There may be better opportunity to incorporate transit priority measures like transit turn lanes, dedicated transit turn lanes, and generally the option is lower construction cost and less complex in terms of design and construction. There was really good support for the roundabout option among PIC2 attendees and city staff. And certainly the city will continue to consider roundabout feasibility in other locations. So where are we in the design process? We've talked about a few key aspects and material presented at PIC2. And now we'll talk about sort of how we've moved through the design process and where we are. We typically move through a design in a stepwise manner since some design decisions influence other decisions further down the track. And for Bradford Street, first we identified design considerations and constraints. Then we developed that road cross section or the arrangement of the elements in the right-of-way, and that's what you saw in the sketch just a few minutes ago. We looked at intersection options for Tiffin Street. All of that was discussed at PICs 1 and 2. Now we're moving on to talk about the road and right-of-way alignment and then the overall design concept where all of those pieces get assembled into a plan. And my colleague, Catherine Jim, is going to lead you through this part of the presentation. Catherine?
Great, thanks, Gilly. And so for the proposed improvement on Bradford Street, we have assumed that our expanded right-of-way is going to occur largely around the center line of the road to offer a balance to potential property impact on either side of the road itself. Now, there are some localized constraints that we do need to respect, such as no impact to the water treatment facility, and some of the development plans may be in more advanced stages as well. So in those cases, the expanded right-of-way may be shifted to either one side of the road, and you'll be seeing that later in the presentation. Also note that we have applied the typical cross sections that you saw in earlier slides. But in the future, the city may decide to look for opportunities for slightly narrow cross-sectional elements in constrained areas. And again, for the purpose of the EA study, the proposed property line is shown for the 34-meter right-of-way to allow that flexibility for the city to make minor modification in the future as required. Now, one of the focus areas within our study area is in the south end of our study area around the Tiffin Street intersection. And you saw that in earlier slide that we have evaluated between a roundabout and a signalized intersection. And we're proceeding with the signalized intersection option. Within that context of the signalized intersection of Tiffin Street, we also developed two options. Both options assumed an expanded right-of-way on Tiffin Street with active transportation facilities, subject to city's future transportation master plan, and also a Class EA study that is similar to this one. Now, we're also aware, once again, of the constraint at the water treatment plant that we don't want to impact that facility. So the two options that we have developed at Tiffin Street are as follow. Option one is to maintain the easterly edge of the right-of-way and maintain close to the existing alignment of the road itself. And option two, we're looking at potentially shifting it to the west to achieve a more ideal technical design. In this slide, this is where you see the two options. And again, you see Bradford Street coming into the intersection itself, intersecting with Tiffin Street. Option one is on top and option two is at the bottom. Now, we have reviewed these two options in terms of land use, geometric design, and operation perspective. Currently, Bradford Street is posted at 50 kilometers per hour, and it is assumed to remain the same in the future. Recognizing the urban nature of the corridor itself, we have assumed a design speed of 60 kilometers per hour, and that is typical when it comes to design standard, that it will generally be between 10 to 20 kilometers per hour above the posted speed. That just means we're applying a set of design parameters in terms of the curve on the road and also the associated sight line that is associated with this particular design speed. From a geometric perspective, option two at the bottom is a more desirable design approaching the intersection to Tiffin Street. Option one, which is more akin to the existing alignment, actually does not meet the parameters of our future design conditions. Now, by providing a more comfortable angle through the intersection, as we see in option two, we're actually allowing better sight line at the intersection and overall network operation. Better sight distance also ensures safe operation for all road users, whether you're walking, cycling, or driving through the area. Now, this shift in option two also allows more spacing between the intersection of Bradford Street and also Lakeshore Road for better lane storage for vehicle, especially in the future with the development of the Ellendale Transit Hub. The extra storage will be beneficial from an operational perspective, including providing for an exclusive turn lane for transit purposes. Also, there's more space at the mobility hub on Essa Road where bus bays or access to the mobility hub may be located. And don't forget, Bradford Street also provide access into the water treatment plant facility, which is just to the north of the intersection on the east side, both in and out. Now, the shifted alignment in option two allows for more spacing and visibility for that access as well. And that's something that staff at the water treatment plant recognize as a benefit. Between the two options, we do recognize there is a difference in the remnant parcel size for future redevelopment. It is about 2,000 meters square, which is a difference of about 25% between the two options. While the benefit of option 2 may appear marginal, we want to emphasize that infrastructure are in place for a very long time. And this is our opportunity to protect the lands that we need for an improvement in the road alignment for the longer term. And also one thing we want to add to is the remnant property parcel in the northeast quadrant may also be used for a gateway feature. So with this, we're moving forward with option 2 as our preferred in our design plan. So over the next few slides, we will review a few of the key components of the preliminary design concept plan. You will see the plan from an aerial top-down view, and it is based on the typical cross-section that you saw a few slides ago, with 2 lanes in each direction, boulevard features, cycle track, and sidewalk. As we scan through the plan, I'm going to highlight some of the area of interest, such as landscape opportunities. Please note the design concept plan will be available online for you to download and take a closer look. A reminder also that the future plan is based on the expanded 34-meter right-of-way. So it is going to be more compared to the existing, so therefore there will be some property impacts. But once again, the implementation and improvement on Bradford Street is not within the current 10-year capital plan, and it will be driven by the timeline and schedule of redevelopment in the area. There are no immediate capital works planned for Bradford Street at this time. Once again, the purpose of us developing this design concept is so that the city can protect the right-of-way for Bradford Street for the future. And as we know, there are many ongoing active development in the adjacent properties. If we don't take the opportunity now to identify the property protection, there may not be enough space in the future to give the city the flexibility in implementing amenities in an urban corridor, again, as you saw in previous cross-section. So with this, I'm going to ask my colleague Kate to bring up the design concept plan. Kate. Now, this is the design concept plan from a high level for the improvement on Bradford Street between Tiffin Street and Dunlop Street. Once again, this is a top-down view, and later on, as I walk through some of the elements, we will have the opportunity to zoom into the corridor itself. So this is just an overview to highlight what are some of the colors, what do they mean. So on the plan itself, first off, from an overview perspective, the future development plans are shown in the red hatching based on what we found on the city's website. They're all in different stages of approval, but this is just to show that the corridor indeed is very active and more development plans may be coming. In the middle of the plan, the gray and the lane marking shows the 2 lanes in each direction, same as existing and generally keeping with existing center line on other than in the Tiffin Street intersection area, where we will have a shift to the west, as we talked about just a few slides ago. Now, as a concept, and as shown in the typical cross-section that you saw, there may be a median being provided in the middle of the road, and you see that in the yellow where landscape elements may be provided. Now, this is conceptual only and will be subject to future development application and their approval on access management. Now, the boulevard on both sides of the road, these are essentially your new elements. As you zoom in, you will see the concept includes the 2.5 meter boulevard space in that light green color. Behind the boulevard, there's a 2 meter cycle track in the orange color. And the sidewalk is just adjacent to the cycle track on the outside. The boulevard space, cycle track, and sidewalk are on both sides of the road. You will see the existing property line as well in the blue, and the proposed right-of-way line marked in a bit of a dash pink or purplish color. The land between the two lines reflects area that will be required for the expanded right-of-way and for these new elements as well. So I'm going to walk through some of the main features from the south end of our study area at Tiffin Street intersection first. So starting at the Tiffin Street intersection, we already talked about the shift to the west. In the southbound direction, we're going to be providing a double left turn, and you will see the transition of cycling facility on Bradford Street itself to a multi-use path on the west side of the road, and also a sidewalk on the east side. So once again, just to orientate ourselves, north is to the right of the page, south is to your left, and then east is the bottom of the page, and west is the top of the page. So at this intersection, we have space allocated for cyclists as well to park and wait for the correct signal to cross. So okay, if you can just zoom into the intersection a little bit, you can see the little green space that we have protected for cyclists when they cross the road. This is where they can park and wait for the right signal before they cross the road itself. Okay, if you can just zoom out a little bit, I want to highlight in the westbound direction at this intersection, we're also seeing a potential or concept for an exclusive transit turn lane, and it's the middle lane that you see hashed out in the pink area. So this is, once again, a potential concept for an exclusive transit lane going into the Allendale Mobility Hub. On Essa Road, which is south of Tiffin Street, there are opportunities as well for bus bay, depending on what the Allendale Transit Mobility Hub is planning to be. So you will see on the plan here, we've got some space allocated for bus bay where the bus can pull in, again, for people coming in and out of the Allendale Mobility Hub. Note that by the time as the road approach the existing rail track, the road will generally be reaching the existing elevation again. So we're not looking at major reconstruction of elevation at the intersection itself. Now in the northeast corner at Tiffin and Bradford Street, because of the shift in the alignment, there's going to be opportunity for a gateway feature and other landscape element. As we head north from here, we see the water treatment plant on the east side. So, and this aerial image is quite clear. You can see an aerial image of the water treatment plant itself. The existing access into the water treatment plant just north of Tiffin Street is going to remain. The treatment plant itself is a constraint, and the expansion of the right-of-way will largely be to the west in this vicinity, all the way up to just past Brock Street. So this whole stretch between Tiffin and up to Brock Street, generally the expanded right-of-way will be to the west. We do take note of the location of the new right-of-way line for Bradford Street and the associated property impact. But again, we want to emphasize that this corridor is for the future, and improvement of the road will be driven by redevelopment. You will see that we have made some notes of transit stop locations. For example, the one just south of Brock Street, you're going to see the little orange square there. Now, these locations are based on conceptual input from Barrie Transit. Recognizing these may change in the future, but essentially the footprint required for the transit shelter itself may be within the space of the boulevard. Now, at Brock Street, this is our first intersecting side street. There's going to be a minor realignment to the road itself for better geometry and better sightline when turning into Brock Street. As we continue north of Brock Street, access to the water treatment plants remain at Dixie Road. And again, you continue to see the median that is throughout the road in the yellow highlight. As we approach John Street And from that point on to the north, the expansion of the right-of-way is generally along the center line. That means the frontage impact to the property on both sides are relatively similar. At the John Street intersection, Kate, if you would just zoom in, and also similar at other side street, you will see as an example that we have cross ride going in the north-south direction. That's where the cursor is. You can see the marking on the street itself. That means these cross ride facility allow cyclists to continue their ride on the road without dismounting. But you will see that the bike facility from Bradford Street will transition to the on-road facility at the side street. However, the sidewalk will be able to continue as you turn into the side street. And this type of treatment is actually very similar as we travel towards Victoria Street and Bradford Street. So Kate, if you want to pen very slowly so we can, everyone can see generally that's how it looks like. Now in this section of Bradford Street, again through John Street, Victoria Street, and Bradford Street, we do have a left turn lane provided at each of these intersections. So once again, allowing the ability to turn in to the side street itself. Victoria Street will remain as a signalized intersection, and John Street and Bradford Street will remain as stop control. As we continue to travel north and approach Simcoe Street, you will see the proposed development hatch out in red on either side of the road. Once again, the intent of this concept plan will serve as input when reviewing development application that will allow the city to explain how much of the roadway elements is required to be protected within the road right of way, and how far the setback is required from the development property. Now at Simcoe Street, we do recognize at that particular intersection, there will be a future west leg into the development. And we're only showing a very short stop in the concept, again, recognizing that the full development of this intersection will be subject to the future development plan. As we continue to travel north on this plan, we're almost reaching our northerly study limit at Dunlop Street. Our outside lane traveling north will become the right turn lane and drop off as we head onto High Street, because High Street is a one lane in each direction street. So we will have to drop one of the two lanes, but we will still have a left turn lane being provided at that intersection. The existing channelized right at Bradford and Dunlop is proposed to be removed. The driveway access of those property on the east side will be replaced with a laneway, and the existing parkette itself also in the southeast quadrant of Bradford and Dunlop will be shifted as well. In detailed design, there will be opportunity to look at how some of these features or some of the material that are within the parkette may be reused. Now, this is a very quick overview of the preliminary design plan. There are lots of information, and I'm sure it will take some time to digest, and I'm sure there will be some questions towards the end of the presentation as well. But certainly, the takeaway message too is, once again, this is a concept plan that shows the future expanded right of way that may be planned to accommodate not just for vehicles, but for cyclists, for pedestrian, for transit, as well as opportunities for landscaping. So again, particularly in the area of Tiffin Street and Dunlop Street, there are potential for gateway features. So with that, I'll pass the presentation back to Gilly, who's going to show us a few renderings on how Bradford Street may look and the landscape design elements.
Thanks, Catherine. And Kate, before you leave that plan, I used the term access management earlier in the presentation, and it's kind of a sometimes it's hard to understand what we mean by access management, but this plan view gives us a really clear picture where we have these stretches of Bradford Street where we have that continuous median and we're not showing any entrances to the development areas. There will be entrances, but our goal really is to try to reduce the number of individual entrances and try to consolidate entrances into the new developments. And why this is important is when we think about the objective of getting walkers and cyclists out into this corridor, we want to make sure that they're able to move freely through the corridor without sort of, numerous stopping points at individual entrances and driveways. And so when you heard me talk about access management as being one of our recommendations in this project, that's what we're talking about, is really in this future corridor, keeping those entrances consolidated, reducing the overall number, reducing those number of potential conflict points, so that the corridor can operate as intended for active users. So I just wanted to touch on that really quickly before we left the plan. And as you can see, there's lots of information and notes embedded in this plan. And this is why we think that you'll want to sort of take some time to zoom into your areas of interest after this meeting. And we anticipate there will be lots of follow-up questions as you zoom in and sort of notice things, and you want to ask more questions about that. So thanks, Kate, for doing that, and we can go back to the slideshow. So sometimes understanding that plan view is a little bit challenging, especially if you're not used to sort of thinking about things from the top down like that. So to assist us in better visualizing that design concept, we have some sketches and renderings. And if you attended PIC2, you'll recognize the sketches like this one. What we've done is create additional renderings that provide similar views with a slightly different visual effect. And we'll just kind of go through those, and you'll get a sense of what we're intending for the corridor. And you've seen this image before with the road cross section and all of the road elements from this oblique angle. But if we go to another angle and another view, you can see from the top down, we've got the median in the center, the travel lanes. We've got a boulevard space where the hydro poles are on the east side. And we've got pedestrian scale lighting and the transit stops and street furniture in that boulevard area. We've got the cycle track, and then we've got the sidewalks. And what we're showing here too is even beyond the road right-of-way, we're showing some space, setback space between the right-of-way and the buildings. And that's what we call the public-private realm interface. And it's kind of a jargony word that just really means we're transitioning from the sidewalk into the storefront areas. And that area could be occupied by restaurant patios and other sort of landscaping entrances to the new developments. And that's kind of how the road right-of-way transitions into the adjacent land uses. Okay, let's go to the next one. And this is kind of a street side view. Again, we showed this one at PIC2, if it looks familiar to you. And if we go to different type of rendering, again, you really see the intent to have the street trees and sort of lower level landscape plantings providing some green structure to offset the hardscape or the hard surfaces in the right-of-way. Again, just all towards making this a really livable and attractive space to be in beside the roadway. And the next one. And this is just kind of a view from, say, the other side of the road. And again, the same idea with opportunity for trees in the median, trees in the boulevard, the trees having the benefit of you know, in terms of thinking about climate change, in terms of shade, and lots of benefits there. So good. Okay. So Catherine alluded to this. In the next phase of design, a streetscape plan will be developed that really lays out all of the aspects of the landscape plantings, the furnishings, pedestrian scale lighting, and gateway features. And the environmental study report, or our EA document that we're going to be producing at the end of this study, and the design concept that will be part of that report will reflect the design intent and the principles to be considered in future. We really do want to sort of make sure that we're communicating the vision and the intent of that streetscape plan for future designers. And in terms of inspiration, we see opportunities for a really visually impactful gateway, like the Thunder Bay sign, Kate, if you just want to float your cursor over that. And again, that's sort of envisioned at the south end, adjacent to the wastewater treatment plant, where we're sort of gaining a little bit of space there. We could have enhanced intersection areas at the primary intersections at Tiffin Street and at Dunlop Street, and Kate's kind of showing a visual there of what that looks like. And we kind of already have those areas. It's just sort of maintaining and enhancing those. Street furniture examples, and even maybe a transit stop design. I mean, there's so many great opportunities to create that vibrant and unique corridor along Bradford Street, and we certainly want to sort of create that excitement in for that future vision in this plan. So, and in terms of if we want to pop to the next one, because we're not creating the entire streetscape plan at this stage, we selected 2 areas to focus on as examples. So in the north end, we've mocked up this landscape concept that depicts some of the street tree plantings along the street, and a few in the median area there you can see. There's an opportunity to create an intersection corner at Dunlop Street that ties into the new naturalized Kids Creek corridor. We really like the idea of accessing that new green space and in this, you know, in the future community there, and see that as a real benefit. And as Catherine mentioned earlier as well, Stephens Park will be shifted slightly as we reconfigure that channelized right. But the intent really is to certainly take the hardscape, the granite, the stonework, and reuse and relocate that. And depending on the timing of this and the condition of plants, the intent would be to salvage and transplant as many of the plants as possible from Stephens Park. So that's certainly on our radar, and again, we want to kind of reflect that as a commitment to future work. Okay, if we pop over to the south end, we're back at Tiffin Street, and I know the orientation is a little bit off from how our brain wants to think, but north is to the right, and more or less, and you see the wastewater treatment plant, and we've got quite a large area there as a gateway, and you know, we really think about this as being such a great opportunity as people are coming out from GO, and even the mobility hub, because it will be a regional transit hub, and welcoming people, announcing the arrival into the city center, and helping to obscure the wastewater treatment plant. So, and that gateway feature could include a combination of plantings, furniture, and a signature art piece. And certainly the City of Barrie has many wonderful signature art pieces already, and we sort of see this as anchoring the south part of the city center. We're pretty excited about that. And the other option here too, or the other opportunity here too, is Kate, if you just want to point to that middle picture, there's opportunities for what we call low impact development features like rain gardens. And these could be incorporated into Steffens Parking, to the Gateway feature, and possibly other places along the corridor. And this type of feature or approach to stormwater management is consistent with the city's efforts around climate resiliency and sensitive infrastructure. So we're pretty excited about those opportunities. Just stepping back for a minute, just to sort of recheck where we are in terms of how the plan that we've developed aligns with the city's priorities. We believe that the design concept we've developed for Bradford Street aligns very much with the city's strategic priorities around walkable, diverse neighborhoods, improved and expanded public space that's safe and vibrant, and more sustainable mobility options and better connections. With the design concept that we shared and the principles that we've set out for the future detail design, that the focus will continue to be on accommodating planned growth in healthy, complete communities, creating a benchmark in design excellence through making Bradford Street a prominent place in the city center, a true destination with interesting aspects to draw people in, and connectivity and mobility, green and resilient infrastructure, like I just mentioned, and supporting economic prosperity in creating Bradford Street as that desirable destination. With the design concept complete and the future right-of-way requirements identified, we can now move on to completing the impact assessment, and that'll be our next step. And in doing so, we consider potential positive and negative effects to socioeconomic, cultural heritage, and natural environments. We'll be looking at specifically at drainage and stormwater, groundwater source protection, built cultural heritage and archaeology, natural environment, property and access, and climate change considerations. We'll also be recommending at a very high level, preliminary level, mitigation measures. And we'll be making commitments to future work, ensuring that all of the future regulatory requirements are met and future permits approvals are clearly identified. And we keep saying that this is a long range study, and we really see the commitments to future work as being so important in this study to guide that further design and implementation in the future. So all of this will be documented in what we call the environmental study report, or the EA document. So in terms of property impacts, what if your property is impacted by the project, and what does this mean? For properties that will undergo redevelopment, the recommendations in this study are for that long-term protection. This means if a developer was to purchase your property or develop a property they own, that developer will need to convey to the city the identified road right-of-way as a condition of approval. And this is a typical requirement and common across the city and in growing municipalities. This is how rights of way are conveyed to municipalities through that development process. For properties that do not undergo redevelopment, when the city proceeds to implement the project, the city will purchase the required properties at fair market value. And there's a whole sort of realty process around that that we won't get into here. But certainly if you're a property owner and you've got questions, we can take those conversations offline. So again, the project isn't budgeted in the current 10-year capital plan. But if you are a property owner and you have more questions about the project and how it relates to your property, please reach out to Brett, the city's project manager, after this meeting, and we can set up a time to have a conversation about your case. Just in the interest of time here tonight, we know that there will be interest, but we just don't want to spend general time in focusing on property by property questions. So follow up with us after. We're happy to have those conversations. And we'll review Brett's contact information at the end of the presentation. Thank you for sticking with us. It's taking a little bit longer than we had anticipated, but lots of information. In terms of next steps in the EA process, the project team will review and consider all the feedback we receive from the public, agencies, and Indigenous communities. We'll refine the design concept in light of the feedback we received where it's appropriate. We'll complete that final impact assessment, as I just talked about, and those preliminary mitigation recommendations and commitments. We'll prepare the environmental study report to document everything. We'll prepare a staff report to council containing the study recommendations for council's review and acceptance. That council meeting will be open to delegations. The date is to be determined. Again, we'll be notifying through the newspaper, the project webpage, and if you're on the mailing list or have registered for any of the PICs, you'll get a direct notice. Pending council endorsement, we'll issue a notice of study completion that starts the 30-day public review period where you have a chance to look at the entire EA document. Beyond this Class EA study, we wanted to talk about this just again because of this long range nature of the study. The shelf life for a Class EA study is 10 years unless any aspect of the plan has been implemented. And this Class EA is about long-term protection, but the implementation of the design will be really driven by the pace of redevelopment. So if redevelopment advances quickly, the implementation timeframes may be accelerated. And the capital program is reviewed each year by council, and priorities are set based on sort of what's happening in the city, and various pressures and priorities shift from year to year. So if development occurs at a more modest pace and 10 years elapses with no part of this plan being implemented, then the Class EA study will be refreshed or updated through what's called an addendum. And the addendum just basically confirms or refines the design plan relative to the transportation and planning context of the day. And it would also include a full consultation program similar to this EA study. So that brings us to the end of our presentation. It's a lot of information. Thank you so much for listening. We know your time is valuable, and we really do appreciate you spending it with us this evening. We encourage you to provide your written feedback through the project webpage. Reach out to us via email. Brett's email is down below. The project webpage is here. As we mentioned off the top, the presentation and the recording will be available on the project webpage in the next few days. Brett's available if you want to reach out to him for further conversation, his email, or you can reach him through the project webpage as well. I think that's it. With that, we'll shift over to reviewing the question answer, and Kate and Catherine, I think, are going to lead us through some of the question answers, and I'm seeing we've got about 9 of them now.
Yeah, that's right. So I think maybe before we dive into some of the specific question, I just wanted to note a couple of the comments that came in. So first one is actually about a preference to bury the power lines. I think Gillian, earlier in the conversation, you mentioned that the project team have met with Electra, and the potential of burying hydro lines was mentioned, but again, within the context of the EA study, we won't be making that decision, but certainly it is something that in the future, as we get into detailed design, it may be explored.
Yeah.
So then our second comment is actually when Gilly was presenting the design element landscape plan in the north end. there was a comment that noted that that may be a great location for the welcome sign for the downtown Barrie BIA. So I think from our perspective, that's certainly a great idea. Again, the concept that we're showing, really is demonstrating the possibilities that may be out there. So again, that's a great suggestion. I think we can add to our list of potential. Yeah. Okay. So maybe with that, we'll get on to some of the specific questions. So the first question actually is a comment about potential impact to properties on Sanford Street. So Sanford Street is actually a parallel road to the west of Bradford Street between Brock Street and John Street area. So the question is whether that will any of the property will be expropriated by the city to accommodate this plan. Maybe I'll start off with a response to this. Is our design concept plan is showing the expanded protected right of way on Bradford Street only. Property on the adjacent parallel street is not expected to be impacted directly as a result of the improvement itself on Bradford Street. And then our next question is actually related to an element of how we may use the right-of-way space. So for example, whether the consideration of automatic public toilets or even restroom area may be considered in our right-of-way layout. So again, I think at this time, we haven't explored fully the detail of what may be some of the potential elements in the right-of-way, but that's certainly an interesting
That's a good
suggestion. Yeah.
Thanks, Grant. Yeah, that's you're right. Those are some of the emerging technologies and things that that we will be grappling with accommodating in the future. I think you're right about that. So we haven't, addressed that specifically, but this kind of falls in that category of like, we know there's things coming that will be looking for space in the right of way. So good question.
Thank you. And then the next question is in making reference to a meeting with the consultant for the proposed Performing Arts Center. So a meeting happened last week, and it noted that the architect advised that Simcoe Street itself would be extended to the west of Bradford Street and disappear to contradict our plan. So I think in this case, we do acknowledge that there will be different type of development happening on the west side of Bradford Street and a Simcoe Street being extended. So we do recognize that. But at this time, once again, I think the plan is certainly very active. I don't think there's a specific approval process at this very moment. So I think, we do acknowledge that the road itself will be extended. Gilly, did you want to?
Well, I'll just add to that. We'll make sure that what we're reflecting is current as of when we finalize the report. And your point's taken that things are very fluid right now with the development applications. And essentially when our report is finalized, we'll have to sort of timestamp it and accept that it reflects known conditions at the time of the report being finalized. But thank you for the heads up about that, and we'll track that. We'll follow up with Brad and city folks on that as well.
And just to clarify, that the leg of that intersection, the west leg, is more of a placeholder. There will be access of some sort, but that's just being worked out at this time. So we'll finalize that in terms of just the best available information we have at that time, like Gilly said about time stamping it, and then it'll be an ongoing live discussion with the development parcel on Bradford Street and the Performing Arts Center of what that looks like. This isn't going to tie them into a specific, very specific design at this point, but just a general concept.
Thanks, Brett.
Thank you. The next comment is a comment about traffic, actually, is asking if we can discuss the traffic trade-offs between Bradford Street and Lakeshore Road, sorry, Lakeshore Drive. So I think in this case is really looking at the overall traffic operations of the network in the area between Bradford Street and a function of Lakeshore Drive itself. So Phil, I don't know whether you want to jump in, maybe comment a little bit on the traffic aspect.
Mute,
Phil,
Phil.
you're on mute.
You're on mute. Oh, still on
Oh,
mute.
you're still on mute.
Sorry,
Third time's the charm.
It is. Yeah, I think we kind of missed the comment about the welcome sign for downtown Barrie BIA, but yeah, that's just a general comment. Yeah, I think the trade-offs for Bradford Street and Lakeshore is more Lakeshore's kind of more the scenic drive, and Bradford's going to handle the heavier, downtown to the Barrie, or sorry, the Allendale Go hub, right? So that's kind of the vision, and so Bradford's going to be sort of more of the heavy duty kind of traffic spine, right? So it is slated to handle a significant amount of traffic, and that's kind of what the modeling is going to show. So we expect that it's going to be, it's going to be a fairly functional corridor. So having said that, both corridors are going to handle a fair amount of traffic, and there's only so much that we can do to disperse the traffic between the two corridors. So it's kind of like the traffic's going to go where it's going to go, and both roads are going to be busy commuter corridors no matter what we do, right? So no matter how much capacity we put on one versus the other, traffic's going to kind of equalize in terms of travel times in the AM and PM peaks. So really that's what they're going to serve in terms of those commuter travel times. So that's what they're going to serve in the commuter times. And then off peak, Lakeshore is going to be kind of a scenic drive, and Bradford Street's going to be kind of a complete street. That's what it's going to serve in terms of a function. So yeah, that's really what they're going to do. So hopefully that kind of answers the question, but there's kind of an open-ended question, but hopefully that's sort of the trade-offs. But during peak times, they're going to be both commuter corridors, and really there's not a whole lot I think we can do about that, because they're sort of wedged at against the lake, and there's not a whole lot of alternatives. So that's unfortunately the reality.
Brett, anything to add to Phil's response?
Yeah, no, Phil, that was great. We really want to make sure that Bradford Street functions as that primary arterial corridor, and not to repeat what Phil said, we do want to have that alternative to Lakeshore. We are cognizant of not reducing that capacity, which would exacerbate problems on Lakeshore. But we could see in the future where, by doing what we're recommending through this process, that with future potential additional traffic calming on Lakeshore, if the city does decide to go in that direction, we've got the technical background and justification from a network perspective to kind of move in that direction, where we're building the right pieces to allow that, to help try and throttle traffic a bit on Lakeshore. It's never going to be an easy thing, and I don't think we'll want to be in a position of restricting access, but slowing things down, making things take a little bit longer on Lakeshore, making it a little bit more pedestrian friendly is just something staff and traffic and transportation are very cognizant of, and that's funneled into the recommendations as well as part of this study. So Lakeshore, ideally we want it to be that parkway a bit slower, recognizing it's not necessarily always operating in that fashion today, but that's where we want to get to. But we want to make sure that Bradford Street's set up to accommodate anything we do to Lakeshore as best as possible. So
Yeah, and I think as a follow-up to this question to you to respond by Phil and to Brad, I think that we have a couple of comments that came in and asked about whether the speed limit on Lakeshore itself can be reduced to motivate division, and whether there would be specific elements to make Lakeshore a slower, more scenic route.
So on the speed limit itself, our traffic department is looking into that as a separate item from a council motion. So that is being reviewed. And if there's any specific questions on timelines, reach out to me so I can confirm that and get back to you. You can reach out to me at brett.gratrix@barrie.ca.
So another question. Sorry, I'm just filtering through. There are lots of enthusiastic comments that are coming in. So when Gilly was presenting the mitigation measures, we have a question about whether permeable surfaces will be considered for sidewalk, cycle tracks, and et cetera, to help reduce the runoff.
Yeah, that's a great question. Certainly the permeable surfaces, could very well be an option. We haven't gone into that level of design detail, but that will be, something that's discussed during a detailed design phase. Permeable surfaces, we've seen them used on cycle tracks. Sometimes there's some maintenance concerns about them. I will say that even where a permeable surface may not be used, there may be opportunities. I don't know if you recall from one of the landscape precedent images, but the low sort of planting beds, we could look at like a low impact development approach where stormwater runoff from the cycle track is directed into those planting beds, and look at that as a stormwater management technique for boulevard areas, not just cycle track, but other boulevard areas. So it's a great suggestion, and that'll be something that's considered in detailed design. Having said that, we can definitely include these types of ideas in mitigation recommendations and commitments to future work in the EA document. Brett,
Great.
anything to add?
No, that's great. And that's the real benefit with this process, is that we'll be able to take a lot of these suggestions back and put them for future consideration, whether it's through detailed design implementation, or if we find ourselves in a place where we're doing an addendum to just fine tune some of these details and excellent suggestions.
Mm-hmm. Great. So we have a question about more of the EA process itself. It's asking, what does it mean in terms of shelf life in the next step of the Class D in 10 years? So Gilly, maybe you can expand on that.
Oh, sure. I'm just looking for that question. It must be a little bit further down.
Yeah.
What we mean by shelf life is when a Class EA is completed, we look at existing conditions, the planning context, the policy context, and all of those elements factor into the decisions we make and the recommendations of the EA. If more than 10 years has elapsed since the EA was completed, and there hasn't been any movement in terms of implementation, like nothing's been constructed, then it's good planning practice, and actually it's required to go back and recheck all of those elements. So recheck the existing conditions. Maybe there's been changes that need to be accounted for. Review the planning context. Maybe there's been changes in the official plan or transportation master plan or other policies that relate to the decisions that you're making for that project. And so that 10-year sort of recheck that's what it represents, where we would do an addendum, review all of those aspects, and then kind of determine whether or not the previously recommended plan is still valid or still works, or if it should be refined and updated. So that's really what that means.
Thanks, Gilly. And then back to more of questions related more of the community impact. So we have a question about we haven't mentioned anything about the potential effect of the quality of life of residents living on Sanford Street, and building that are 3 stories high is going to create some shadow effect on family homes, and this is going to be a problem. So I think that's more related to kind of the future planning of the corridor itself. So Brad, perhaps you may want to take this one.
Yeah, more of a land use planning question. So this is really focused on the corridor in response to what the official plan as a parent document the city uses to then build upon I guess children plans, which would be your master plans. So the land use planning comments probably best towards the OP, the official plan, which was just updated. And then our zoning bylaw coming out as well, which will be the next opportunity in Q1-ish on buildingbarrie.ca to provide feedback on just the building height and building massing for that. But we can definitely take that comment and pass that on to our planning department. Thank you.
Brad. The next question is related to the Bradford and Tiffin Street intersection. The comment is, the right-hand slip lane is being maintained at the intersection itself. And the comment is that, these slip lane designs are known to promote high speed and also a dangerous situation for pedestrian and vehicle interaction. So I think we're talking about that channel going from the westbound from Tiffin Street onto Bradford itself. So maybe Phil, I'll let you take this one.
Sure. Yeah, we've changed the design of the slip lane. Before it was a much broader and wider design, which promoted high speeds. We've changed it to what we call a smart channel design, which ends in a yield condition. So drivers, kind of come to a yield or almost stop and then look to the left and make a right turn. But this isn't cast in stone. We do need some sort of an exclusive right turn because the right turn volumes are really, really high. So it could be a smart channel design like this, or it could be just a right turn lane, like an exclusive right turn lane. This is what we've done at Tiffin and Lakeshore. We're just showing a right turn lane. So it could be either a smart channel design like this or a right turn lane. So we've shown the smart channel design here and the right turn lane design at Tiffin and Lakeshore. So it could be one or it could be the other. Yeah, here we're showing just an exclusive right turn lane. More because of the geometry of the intersection, it's coming in at an angle. So it's easier to design just a simple exclusive right turn lane here than a smart channel design. But these are just that preliminary design. So detail design is when you make the final decision on these types of things. So for now, we're just showing one at one location, one at the other location. But a detailed design, you'd make the final decision as to which design you go with. So these aren't cast in stone at this point.
Great. Thanks, Phil. Our next question is related to the dimension of our cross section. So the question is asking about the width of the travel lane that is out there now, and also whether we have considered 3-meter lane being considered for the future design, as it is a more urban road, and that's more of an urban feel with the 3-meter width, and that could provide greater traffic calming, safety, and pedestrian access. So I think, just reflecting back, our typical cross section right now, it is showing an inside lane of 3.3 meter and an outside lane of 3.5. So maybe I'll start off with the answer. I think, as Gilly mentioned, the cross-sectional element, at this point is what we're proposing as concept. So in the future, it does allow the city to make a certain modification the cross-sectional element dimension. And in this case too, we also need to think about what the lane needs to accommodate, whether, for example, for a transit vehicle, sometimes they have certain requirement when it comes to a lane width. So we do need to take that consideration as well. Brad or Gilly, whether you guys want to maybe jump in.
I think you've explained it well. We're being a bit cautious about being overly aggressive, recognizing we're not moving to implementation. There's going to be steps in between that. One of the concerns would be if we move to higher order transit, it's just accommodating that width. So we don't want to tell a story where we're really demonstrating a surplus of width. These are reasonable lane widths, not saying they couldn't change. But that's a real concern, is that next step of transit, and what does that need in terms of right-of-way space and lane configuration, which may get bigger depending on what that looks like. But again, that would be subject to justification through our transportation master plan update. But I think the biggest take home is none of these dimensions are absolutely fixed in stone, and there will be adjustments to them closer to implementation, based on that kind of context of the day on the corridor.
Great. Thanks, Brett. Our next couple of questions actually is related to intersection itself again. So it's asking whether a traffic, it's making a comment to note that traffic light is actually needed to safely cross Bradford Street at Brock Street. Right now, pedestrian will need to go northbound to use the northbound bus stop. They will have to walk about 400 meters south or 500 meters to the north to safely cross. And also a similar comment is also about crossing Bradford Street at John, which is also a challenge, and why are stop signs still being recommended, except at Victoria. So I think, to kick us off, I think the signalized intersection at Victoria is an existing signal. So that is being remained. At the other locations, and maybe Phil, you can jump in whether, from our traffic analysis, I think we have looked at the operation at these intersections as well. At John and also at Brock Street in particular.
Yeah, I'd have to dig up the traffic report, but I believe in the future these intersections will be signalized. So it's just a matter of at what horizon period the conversion would happen.
Okay, so on our
people.
plan, we're showing it as
Yeah.
a stop sign, but in future, the intent is to signalize them.
Yeah, but that doesn't
Okay.
happen. Those people, it doesn't help those people right now that are trying to cross the road, I realize. So
Yeah.
We'll take that comment back, because that is a long
Yeah.
stretch of roadway. So thank you for that feedback.
Yeah, that's great
Yeah.
feedback. Thank
Yep,
you
for
for
sure.
that.
Great.
Yeah.
Maybe this is a related question to this then, is how is the design aligning with the city's goal of Vision Zero?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the big improvements are multifaceted, with creating safe space for pedestrians and cyclists is the #1 thing we're doing here. Right now we have curb face sidewalks, which is a lower level of service. Probably if you're looking at an active transportation level of service rating, would be on the bottom end of that scale, where we're advancing that to the highest end. And then moving with a fully physically separated cycling lane is, again, a very high level of service. Moving that farther away from the travel lane as much as possible even pushes that even higher. So making sure we're taking care of our most vulnerable road users is the most important part of Vision Zero, and advancing that. The other big element is the access management perspective. That ties into Gilly's comments about trying to work with the development community to embrace the bigger picture and push them to consolidating accesses on this corridor to also improve safety for road users, but also those in the boulevard and active transportation as well. And then the third element too are the improvements that are being proposed as part of the realignment of the intersections at the south end, especially Tiffin and Bradford Street. that shift to the west significantly improves sight lines to the intersection, as well as the tangent approaches to that. So we're not having as much curvature through that intersection as there is today, which would get worse with alternative 1. So alternative 2, hopefully I'm getting the numbers correct. Alternative 2 is what we're recommending. Is a big improvement over what would be there. So it's kind of a multi-factored approach in this design. And when we do go to advance this project further, we'll be looking to test this against latest best practices to make sure that we're in alignment with that. And even things like what Phil was talking about with the smart channel, is that the best case? We'll also be looking at the curve radiuses themselves and the geometrics of the roadway. Can we tighten up any of those radiuses to help slow vehicle speeds down as well, just based on better geometric data when we do go to design that road. So that'll be part of the commitments we make going forward. So it definitely will move the bar significantly forward in the lens of Vision Zero.
Great, thanks, Brett. We have a couple of questions regarding our road element itself. So for example, the first one asks, and it's a comment on, it would be helpful to make one of the car lanes a dedicated transit lane, and whether that's an option. So I think, Gilly kind of pointed to it that the city will be carrying out a transportation master plan in 2023. The question of the potential of higher order transit is intended to be answered at that time. So Gilly or Brett, what do you want to expand on that?
I'll maybe add to that, and Brett can jump in. And certainly with the current transportation master plan, the option or the possibility of having HOV, high occupancy vehicle / transit priority or transit lane for that outside lane was identified even in the 2019 transportation master plan. So that's definitely on the radar, although we haven't shown it in our typical cross section. The intent is there. We're recognizing the possibility of those outside lanes becoming dedicated transit lanes. And that kind of goes back to some of the rationale and the decision making when we had members of the public early in the study ask, hey, can you reduce this to 2 travel lanes and make some improvements within the existing corridor? That desire to have dedicated transit lanes to encourage ridership and transit efficiency was certainly part of our decision making at that time. So it's a great suggestion, and it's definitely, the city's been contemplating it, and this plan protects for that.
Great, thanks, Gilly. The next few questions, they're related to a similar theme, again, asking about the use of the right-of-way. The first one indicate, why are we still considering expanding the right-of-way in the city core road when other cities like Guelph, Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal are reducing their right-of-ways? Second question is similar theme. Why do we think there will be more cars in 10 years when we're working towards more walkable communities and different modes of transportation? Why do we keep building more roads for cars when we are promoting a shift in transportation mode and there will be less vehicles? And the last one to also indicate that in our first PIC early this year, we show that there's going to be free-flowing conditions on Bradford Street in the 2051 p.m. peak within the existing 18-meter cross-section. Why are we expanding the road right-of-way protection on Bradford from 18 to 34 for 2051? So maybe I'll start us off by noting that the proposed right-of-way that we have shown, and we have shown it in the rendering, we have shown it in the typical cross-section as well. The intention is not just for vehicle. The new added element is indeed being proposed for use by cyclists, for pedestrian on the cycle track, on the sidewalk. There are opportunities for new transit shelter that may be provided in the boulevard itself. And the median in the road, which is also within the right of way, allows that landscape corridor to be implemented. So there's a lot of added elements to make this more of an urban road to accommodate, to accompany the future redevelopment and intensification in the area. And, you know, as we have mentioned before as well, you know, the future right of way is going to help provide the city with more flexibility in terms of the element being implemented. So maybe Gilly or Brad, I'll pass it on to you to expand on that.
Yeah, I think it's important to keep in mind we're not adding vehicle lanes to this, and we're not adding more space dedicated to cars. And when you consider the growth plan for the city, so we're at 151,000 give or take, and we're going to 298,000 by 2051. We're not recommending more lanes. So when you work out the math, we're kind of taking away lanes in a sense. We're moving that population, a huge amount of people, by transit, by active transportation. And there will be some folks that do drive, but we're not building more lanes for those folks. So that's a really important aspect. The other aspect is functionality. This is a really important quarter for emergency services as well. Having just a lane in each direction, similar to Lakeshore, that doesn't work for them. They can't have cars, it blocks them in. Cars have nowhere to go, nowhere to pull over, and that gets very difficult for them. So that's the other aspect to that. Yeah, I think that's just in coupled with the previous statements Gilly's made about the corridor needs and justification. And I will say too that this corridor, the need to maintain 2 lanes per direction has been established since 2004. When at that time the city was planning for a population in the 155,000 range. I'd have to look at the exact number, and it was in the early 20s. So you can see how kind of less we've came in terms of road expansion. So early 20s at 155,000 to 2051 at 298,000. It's the same recommendation going forward, same number of lanes. We're not building more lanes. So definitely there's different places doing different things. Guelph, for example, they've thrown the nuance in on their recommendations, though, that they will expand lanes for transit. And if you read deeper into their documents, it does give them that wiggle room. So they're not committing to no widening. So that's just of note as well. So again, building on the other uses of this corridor with transit, it's really a multi-factored rationale why we need this. So.
Great, thanks, Brent. I'm noticing the time too. We're at 8:30. We have a few more questions to go, so perhaps if people are willing to stay on, we'll answer to the remaining questions as well. So I have a set of 3 questions that are actually related to more of the design element of the road itself. So one talks about perhaps we can look at different type of curbs that is better for accessibility for people who are in wheelchairs and strollers. So again, it's just looking at the different design elements. Also a comment on the median itself, which may be problematic for people with mobility because they will then have to travel further distance before they can cross the road. And then also there's a comment about the consideration of on-street parking. I know we haven't really mentioned about the potential of it. But again, this is another design element that perhaps in the future that can be looked at. And then also there's a comment about brick roads and sidewalk that may be a concern for people who are in wheelchair. Again, a very similar comment that we are hearing about the different curbs type to be used. So again, these design elements will be looked at in more detail in detailed design. Certainly these are aspects that we can comment on in terms of our high level design element. Anything else to add for Gilly or Brad? Good. Okay, so this comment is actually related to the roundabouts. I think there was a concern about emergency vehicle travel traveling through the roundabout itself, and that may slow them down. So I think maybe just as a point of clarifications, for our study, we're actually recommending a signalized intersection through Tiffin Street. But I don't know, Phil, whether just in general about roundabouts operation for emergency vehicle, in your experience, how that might be.
Generally, they've because they generally produce shorter queues and move traffic more efficiently, they kind of are comparable to signalized intersections. Signalized intersections have opticoms, right? So they turn to green when emergency vehicles approach. But because roundabouts kind of flush traffic out and move traffic more efficiently, that's kind of a wash in terms of getting emergency vehicles through. So that's kind of the consensus, is that they're more or less equal in terms of providing access to emergency vehicles. So that's sort of the word on the street for roundabouts. So.
Okay, thanks, Phil. We have a comment here asking whether Barrie would consider not having as many turn options through the boulevard and instead having U-turn lights at each intersection for those who needing to access opposite direction. So Brad, maybe you can comment on the city's experience.
That's a comment we can take back. One of the challenges is it does take more right of way. That's probably the biggest barrier to that, but that is a potential solution to the median barrier challenge. There is a grid network in that area as well. Recognizing there's pros and cons with that as well. But that's something we can take back and have a look at, but we're very cognizant of the feedback we're getting to of not creating more right of way. So it's a delicate balance for this corridor.
Right. So our last question this evening is asking about who's going to be paying for the proposed improvement, and will this result in higher property tax?
So a lot of this work is attributed to growth. So this will be captured in our development charges study. It is today, but not to this level of urbanization. When we see the development happen on this corridor, as we envision through the official plan, the business case should be there, and it will be there to justify the investment in this corridor to create that pedestrian-friendly space. And what we're seeing kind of feedback internally and from our external consultants as well is that you're making that investment in the public realm and in active transportation, which does help offset investments in additional lane widening as well. So keeping the corridors a bit narrower. So it's important to keep the financial conversation in context of the broader network as well, just to as a value proposition of what this project would bring. So no, that's a great question. Now, we wouldn't move forward with this project today. It's too expensive, and it's the level of service doesn't match the corridor. But in the future, if we have multiple high-rise developments on this corridor, you could easily make that business case that it deserves that higher level of service from a landscaping perspective and active transportation. So
great. And I realized, I think one of the questions that was asked earlier about the Simcoe Street and Lakeshore intersection, I didn't get a chance to post it earlier. The question is there a way to also improve the intersection of Simcoe and Lakeshore while this work is being done? As noting that people turning south from Simcoe Street onto Lakeshore currently clog the lane, intending to go straight through to Bradford because the left turn lane isn't long enough. So Phil, I don't know if you recall from the traffic operation, whether that shows that in operating condition, but I think, in the case of our study, I think our focus is more on Bradford Street itself.
Sorry, you cut out for a second there. Could you repeat the first part of that?
So is there a way to improve the intersection of Simcoe and Lakeshore? Because it's noting that people turning south from Simcoe onto Lakeshore is backing up onto the lane instead of going straight through to Bradford, because the left turn lane is not long enough.
That's a challenge with just the road network in the downtown, and I don't think there's going to be a silver bullet solution to make that better. So that would be sort of referring to the westbound move, that westbound left onto Lakeshore backing up, and then the challenge making that straight through move on Simcoe to connect to Bradford Street. Yes, it's likely, yeah, it's a challenging location. It's really a function of that closely, the number of closely spaced intersections along there. So that feeds back to the challenge, kind of ties in with their access management discussion as well, but also the signalization of those other intersections, which we'll have to review just to confirm. But when we have too many intersections in close proximity, you have poor traffic operations, and that's what we're seeing in this location. So we really try our best in that case to space things out, but that's our downtown fabric. So that's common in many downtowns. And really with the pinch point of Kefenfeld Bay, it's really exacerbates the problem. Everyone's trying to get around the bay at that one location, and there's only so many places to do it. So not probably the answer you're looking for, but that's kind of the state of the union on that.
Yeah, there may be some things we can do with an interconnected signal network, but there's only so much we can do.
Great, thanks Brad, thanks Phil. Now this is our final question that just came in. The question is wondering why we would still be considering electrical wires above when we have difficulties in our type of climate. Why not just put wire in electrical boxes right from the start of doing it right the first time? So again, I think this is related back to the potential of burying some of the hydro wires. And again, I think this is a potential that during detailed design may be reviewed with Electra.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to ask Catherine, what did Electra say about the cost premium of burying?
I'll have to go back to my notes, but it is something is quite significant. But at the same time, I think, like you said earlier, this is not something that we would be making a decision on specifically during the EA. So, but it is something that we will be incorporating in our response or our comment record.
And just a bit more commentary. Part of I absolutely understand the aesthetic standpoint. I totally agree with that. One of the challenges on the Bradford Street corridor, and this doesn't mean it won't happen, it's just commentary. The higher voltage lines, which are on Bradford Street, are much more prone when they're underground to issues with breaking. And then to repair them, they're actually more costly is what we're hearing from a life cycle perspective, even if you account for some sort of storm damage. Now, I don't have a complete analysis of what Electra's done, but that's just kind of anecdotal. We'll of course look into that more detail, but I think it's once you get into it, it's much more nuanced than just I agree they're very ugly, but just the challenges, especially with those lines and the functionality of feeding the wastewater treatment plant as well and having that redundancy. So multifaceted problem, but one we'll definitely flag is a big public interest to look into burying those.
Yeah, Brad, that's a great point, because I think, certainly, I think, from an aesthetics perspective, we would all want it to be buried, but at the same time, there are many components that, that are tied to it, be it the construction aspect, be it, the location, and also the maintenance and operation for sure.
Hey, I think we have one final comment.
I think so. Yeah,
we'll wrap it up there. So, do you want to walk us through that comment?
For sure. So, this comment noted that as a downtown resident and employee, I love this corridor plan and want to feel hopeful. How likely are we going to see this plan in the next few years? And if so, what is more likely to be addressed first?
Brett, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, it's great. It's a great question, and I definitely would. Yeah, it would be great if we can move faster on this. I think, as Gilly said in the presentation, this is really growth dependent, the works on this corridor. So it's going to be a bit of time before we get to a point where we can start having the conversation with council about looking to implement this. And we also have to understand that cities under, there's a lot of competing priorities for our available dollars we have for capital projects. So we have to be very careful where we direct those. And we also always, as Gilly said though, review our budgets on an annual basis with council and establish new 10-year plans, building upon recommendations of the previous year. So yes, we definitely understand that the excitement and just the potential for this corridor, but just where we're at right now, it would be, it's more of that long range, and it's really dependent on what happens with the development community on this corridor, how quick things occur. Will really probably be the primary driver of capital timing for these works.
Great. Thanks, Brad, for speaking to that. So with that, I think that's all the questions that we have from this evening.
Thanks,
Super.
everybody. Thank you for spending the past hour and a half with us. Excellent questions. Great conversation here. Feel free to reach out to me, brett.gratrix@barrie.ca. The information will be posted on the website in the next couple of days. We'll get that up there. And yeah, as always, reach out to me if you have any further questions. And if you could get your comments in by January 6th, that would be greatly appreciated. And I'll just turn it over to the team if they have any other final remarks.
I'll just add to that by saying have a look at the project webpage. There are a series of FAQs there. Many of them are from PIC2 and related to the decision making around expanding the right-of-way and that recommendation. And I know there were a few questions here tonight, sort of looking back at our rationale for that, for the recommendation. So have a look at those FAQs because we were fairly, well, we hope we were fairly thorough in rationalizing that decision. And I'll just echo Brett's thank you to everybody. We really appreciate your time tonight. We've had some fantastic questions and comments, and definitely things that we will be taking away and incorporating into the final documentation. We really appreciate the thoughtful feedback tonight. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.